to talk about two topics which are quite controversial in iOS development, really. And that's how to break a project down into smaller parts and how to move between those parts, right? And I'd like to start by just going into this example here. So imagine the iMessage app or the WhatsApp app was structured in this way, for example. In the UIKit world, we'd have more definition of what a stack is. We'd have a navigation controller, and we'd know how to pass that data through. You might start with the app delegate, for example, and then pass some logic down one step at a time. But we don't really have a navigation controller, and you can create so many views in SwiftUI that compose together. There's not really a view either when you think about it, not in the traditional sense, like a view controller. So there's no navigation points and there's no view controllers. How do you bring this all together? And I think logically you have to draw a box around what you consider to be a stack and say, right, that's what it's going to be. And the parent container, which I'm just calling the content view, which tends to be the view that you get when you start a project. You can call it what you like, but it's required because it needs to have an animation container, right, for a transition to take place. So there needs to be some sort of parent container. But you start off with identifying a stack and you say, well, if this stack now is going to be in control of chats, and I select a chat and I drill in further and select a post, then this is what it might look like. And then you decide, okay, this is what the node is, and each member in that node is going to be controlled in this way. And it's a sensible place to then think about state restoration and deep linking, because you can say, well, if I get an on open URL callback, I can go to this root node and I know that I can send instructions to it and it will take care of this stack. So it's a sensible place to start. And just to quickly sort of dive into one of these areas, I won't go into too much detail or into deep linking because I think that goes a little bit too far, but you may, for example, be serializing this to disk. So you might have some JSON that represents your stack, and then you write that to disk. And when you launch your app from cold, you load that JSON from disk and inspect it. So you might find that this stack doesn't make sense anymore if, for example, the stack member in that stack is over 48 hours old. Maybe that's what you decide. Or maybe you decided based on a feature flag. Or if you had some deep link that was coming in, you may pass a value through that deep link and that matters to you. Or maybe the record isn't in the database at all, right? So you make those decisions and then you decide maybe I'll truncate it and I won't actually restore the whole path. It's that kind of power really that you want when you're building out navigation. I could say a bit more there, but I want to try and focus a little bit on the points I want to get across. So this is another topic that's contentious as well. The first kind of inclination is feature modules, right? But I don't think you can really dive into those straight away. It's too hard to think about how you would pull that off, in my opinion. And in my experience, I've done it this way. I've started off with a large module that has a bunch of stuff in it. And you then look at it and decide, is there anything in there I can specialize? And you start moving it out into something that has more meaning, more purpose, and you define a boundary. And you just keep doing that until you get these distinct areas of domains. But what you'll notice when you're doing this is that what happens if you've got some logic like this and it doesn't really belong anywhere, it's ubiquitous. Well, inevitably you're going to need to have a common module between them in order to share that code. And then when you've derived these modules, you can build up another one, which is, let's say, navigation, for example. And we know that we're going to have JSON persistence required, right? So that represents our stack, and maybe we want to encrypt it. So I need to have logic from these other two modules in order to do that, and common comes along for the ride, right? So then you're building out these modules, and you're making sure there's no circular dependencies between them, right? And everything's kind of becoming more and more specialized as you go forward. You can then build your feature module with these components, and that's how I think you can derive behavior. And as you go forward, you may think, well, what if I actually get a really, really large persistence module? Well, you can still break that down even further if you needed to. Maybe the bit that controls persistence as files to disk versus core data could be isolated. Maybe your common module has logic for versioning and how you handle semantic versioning, and you might think, oh, well, maybe I'll cherry pick that out at a later date. You can still do that because you're going in that one direction, so it should be fine to do that, right? And I've found in my experience that that's been more of a pleasure to do, because you end up with such a composable project then. And I often find that if I were to now create another project, that a lot of this logic can just be copied over. But it's hard to define that, really. So for example, the versioning module here, I've made a version controlled repository from it, which is on GitHub, because it's not going to change very often. And if I were to share that with another project, I could control it a lot easier. Whereas these other modules, they're not version controlled, right? They exist in the project as one big monorepo. So then, it's easier to make a change knowing that if any of the public interface for that one were to break that one, I would know immediately, right? So I wouldn't have to cross version boundaries, which would be very difficult. So you can be a bit loose and fast with these modules anyway, but as soon as you identify something that can be isolated, it's worth doing that. It saves on compilation time as well, so I can just hit Command B, and granted I've got an M4, but the speed of compilation is a lot faster. Maybe I just want to work in this one, and you can see it's very small. I hit Command B, and now Xcode only has to deal with these files here, right? So there's my isNil I could even open this up in isolation if I wanted to. So if let's say I wanted to go to this one, I could close Xcode altogether and then go over to the Finder and open this one in isolation. And then you'll see that any downstream dependencies it has get pulled in and they build, but I can now work in this domain. I have even less source at my disposal. So now I'm not putting that additional pressure onto Xcode to build everything from scratch, right? So, it's in my opinion, it's better to break your project down in this way. And navigation is quite a contentious subject. I don't think I've seen any one project behave the same as the next in terms of architecture. So I have a lot to say on that, but maybe I'll make another video to get into that later.